So we know a huge ape did exist, Gigantopithecus. He could well have stood 3 meters tall.
Bigfoot has always been treated like a story, something you hear but never take seriously. But in 2024, researchers used advanced AI to analyze over 10,000 sightings collected over 66 years, each one broken into 150 data points. The goal was simple: find patterns. But what it found was something no one was prepared for. Sightings followed exact locations, repeated timing windows, even specific weather conditions. They increased before storms, appeared during twilight, and clustered in areas where technology fails. And the strangest part? In those exact places, people were always going missing, which never made sense. For years, Bigfoot sightings were treated like random stories. But when the AI connected everything, it revealed a pattern so precise and calculated that it baffled even the analysts. So what exactly did they find? Let's dive in. The study that changed everything. A 10 to 12-foot, human-like figure in the woods, watching from a distance and then gone. For decades, the idea of Bigfoot sounded too strange to be real. But in places like the United States, where sightings were most common, the belief never really disappeared. Hunters, park rangers, even police officers, many of them had stories. They just didn't tell anyone because they knew they'd be laughed at. There was never a system, no serious way to collect all of this and ask one simple question, until 2024. That's when a group of researchers decided to stop treating this like folklore and start treating it like data. They partnered with Google DeepMind, one of the most advanced artificial intelligence systems in the world, not to prove Bigfoot exists, but to look for patterns no human could see. They gathered everything they could find. There are over 10,000 sighting reports dating back to 1958, because that's the year when the name Bigfoot first gained attention, after strange footprints were discovered at a logging site in Northern California. These weren't random internet stories. The data came from law enforcement records, Park Service incident reports, newspaper archives, and detailed witness interviews collected by research groups over decades. Every single report was filtered. Obvious hoaxes were removed. Vague stories were thrown out. What remained were detailed first-hand accounts with exact locations, dates, and descriptions. And then, each one of those sightings was broken down into over 150 separate data points. Where it happened, when it happened, the weather, the terrain, the behavior, the witness. Everything that could matter was recorded. The AI itself was trained on massive systems, wildlife movement patterns, human perception errors, even known hoax behaviors, so it wouldn't jump to conclusions. It wasn't trying to believe, and it wasn't trying to disprove. It was just looking for structure, something consistent, something repeatable. Because if Bigfoot was just an imagination, the data would fall apart. If it was a real animal, the patterns would look biological. That was the expectation. But when the system finished analyzing everything, it didn't confirm a creature. It revealed something far more unsettling. A pattern so specific, so consistent, that it didn't fit any normal explanation. And the first part of that pattern was something no one expected. The hidden hot zones. When the AI began mapping the sightings, the expectation was simple. If this was a real creature, the reports would spread across forests, mountains, and wilderness in a wide, natural way. But that's not what happened. Instead, the map started tightening. Thousands of sightings across decades began collapsing into exact locations. Not regions, not states, but very specific pockets of land, around 150 of them. And once the system isolated these zones, the map didn't just show clusters, it started to look marked, almost like certain places were being used again and again. The AI flagged 4 major regions where this pattern became impossible to ignore. The first was the Cascadia Corridor, stretching across Washington and Oregon. This is where the highest density of sightings appeared. Areas like the Olympic Peninsula, and even the blast zone around Mount St. Helens. But the real focus narrowed down further into places like Cowlitz County and a region called the Dark Divide. These are not easy hiking trails. They are nearly impassable, thick, broken terrain where moving on foot is extremely difficult. But underneath that surface, the AI noted something critical. These lands are carved with lava tubes and basalt cave systems, deep underground pathways that stretch for miles. And sightings here weren't random. They kept appearing near river confluences, especially around the Toutle River, places where animals like elk migrate, almost like something was using these locations strategically. Then came the second zone, the Blue Mountains, right along the Washington and Oregon border. This area stood out for a different reason. The AI flagged it as a biological anomaly. The ground here is covered in loess, a fine glacial sediment that can preserve footprints in extreme detail, even down to skin patterns. And yet, what made this place truly strange was not the ground. It was the signal. This region overlaps with geomagnetic dead zones, areas where GPS systems fail, radios cut out, and technology becomes unreliable. And the data showed something unsettling. Sightings here increase exactly where technology begins to fail. Then came the third zone, and this one raised serious questions. The karst regions of Ohio and the Ozarks, places like Salt Fork State Park, much closer to the human population than expected. But beneath the surface, this land is hollow, filled with sinkholes, underground springs, and massive limestone cave networks. And the AI found something very precise. Nearly 90% of sightings in this region occurred within 1,000 yards of a cave entrance or a disappearing stream. Not near forests in general, but near openings that lead underground, which raised a disturbing possibility. What if these sightings aren't coming from something living on the land, but from something using what's beneath it? And then, the fourth zone, the Everglades in Florida, known locally for sightings of what people call the skunk ape. Here, the pattern changed again. Instead of movement, the AI detected stability, a stationary presence. Sightings clustered in places like Big Cypress and the Miaka River, specifically in intertidal zones, where land and water blend together. These are some of the most resource-rich environments in North America, dense, tangled, nearly impossible to enter without heavy equipment. And the pattern suggested something was staying there, not passing through. Living there, different regions, different terrain, but the same outcome. Whatever it wasn't moving randomly. It was location-specific, environment-specific, almost controlled. And it didn't stop there. What made this even harder to ignore was what these locations overlapped with. The missing persons link. Up until this point, the AI was analyzing a mystery. Strange sightings, unusual locations, patterns that didn't make sense. But when the researchers layered one more dataset over the map, the tone changed completely. Because now, it wasn't just about what people claimed to see. It was about people who never came back. National park records, search and rescue files, missing persons reports, stretching back decades. When these were placed over the hot zones, the room went quiet. The overlap wasn't loose. It wasn't somewhat similar. It was almost exact. The same valleys, the same forests, the same river systems. Places where sightings kept happening were the same places where people kept disappearing, and not in normal ways. These were cases that didn't follow logic. That's when the researchers brought in the work of David Paulides, a former police investigator who spent years documenting what he called the missing 411 phenomenon. Cases where people vanish in the wilderness without a trace. No struggle, no blood, no clear path. Sometimes not even footprints. When the AI cross-referenced his disappearance clusters with the sighting hotspots, the match was nearly identical, not close, not approximate. The same exact regions kept appearing in both data sets, and it didn't stop there. The system pulled in additional investigations, including cases studied by independent researchers who focused on people who seemed to be erased from the environment. Fully prepared adults, experienced hikers, people who knew the land better than anyone, gone without a single clue. Even the search efforts themselves showed something strange. Thousands of search and rescue reports were analyzed, and in many of them, trained tracking dogs refused to continue. They would follow a scent, reach a certain point, and then stop, sit down, whimper, refuse to move forward, as if something in that area broke the trail completely. And then the AI looked deeper, not just where people disappeared, but who. A pattern started forming. Two very specific groups showed up again and again. The first were children, young, small, often disappearing within seconds, even when adults were nearby. One case stood out. A 6-year-old boy named Dennis Martin, who vanished in 1969 in the Great Smoky Mountains. Moments after he disappeared, a witness nearby reported seeing a wild-looking man carrying something over his shoulder, moving quickly through the brush. The second group was the complete opposite. Highly experienced individuals, hunters, military-trained personnel, survival experts, people who don't get lost, people who understand terrain, direction, and danger. And yet, they vanished too, sometimes leaving behind their gear, their weapons, even their shoes, as if whatever happened didn't give them time to react or didn't follow any normal rules. And when all of this was placed together, the sightings, the locations, the disappearances, it stopped looking like a coincidence. It started looking connected, like something was present in these areas, something that appeared and something that took. But here's the even deeper part. The AI didn't just find patterns in who disappeared, it found patterns in when everything happened. And that's where it became even more precise. The unnatural timing. This is where the mystery stopped looking random and started looking precise, almost calculated. The system analyzed over 10,000 sightings across different regions, climates, and decades. And instead of scattered timing, it found something extremely tight. A schedule, not throughout the night, not randomly during the day, but inside very thin windows of time, what researchers call transition periods. The moments when day turns into night and night turns back into day. And the numbers were shockingly exact. Sightings spiked heavily 45 minutes after sunset, and again 30 minutes before sunrise, across thousands of cases, across different countries. Whether it was deep forests in the Pacific Northwest or swamps in Florida, the same timing kept repeating. Like everything was operating on the same clock, not based on location, but based on the sun. And there's something important about these moments. They are when the human eye performs the worst. Light is fading. Shadows stretch. Depth perception breaks down. Your brain struggles to separate shapes from movement. You think you see something, but you can't fully confirm it. And that raises a disturbing question. What if this timing isn't accidental? What if it's being used? Because this doesn't match normal animal behavior. Most animals are either diurnal, active in the day, or nocturnal, active at night. This is neither. This is something targeting the exact moment where humans are most vulnerable visually. But the timing pattern didn't stop there. When the AI layered in weather data, it found another trigger. Sightings didn't just increase randomly. They spiked during very specific conditions, right before storms, not during heavy rain, but in the 2 to 4 hour window before it hits. When barometric pressure drops, when the air starts to shift, when the environment feels unstable. And this goes against everything we know about wildlife. Most predators hide during this time. They conserve energy. They avoid exposure. But here, the pattern flipped. Activity increased, and researchers began asking why. One explanation stood out: environmental masking. Strong winds can hide the sound of movement, branches breaking, footsteps, even something large moving through dense terrain. Changes in air pressure can affect how scent travels, making it harder to track, harder to detect. And then there's something even more unsettling. Some researchers believe low-frequency vibrations, the kind that come before storms, can blend with something called infrasound, a frequency humans don't consciously hear but can feel. It creates unease, fear, a sense that something is wrong, and if something was using that, it wouldn't just stay hidden, it would make you feel it before you even saw it. At this point, the pattern wasn't just strange, it was intentional. Precise timing, precise conditions, not random movement, but controlled appearance. Which leads to the next question. If something is choosing when to appear like this, then what does it actually do when it's there? Behavior of the creature. By now, the pattern had already crossed a line, but the next layer the AI uncovered was even harder to explain, because it wasn't just where and when anymore. It was how this thing behaves when people actually see it. Across thousands of reports from different decades, different states, different types of witnesses, the behavior stayed consistent, almost controlled. The AI broke it down into clear patterns. In nearly 60% of close encounters, the creature didn't attack. It didn't panic either. It simply moved away, calmly. Witnesses described it turning, walking, sometimes stepping behind trees, but not in fear. Then there was another category, around 15% of encounters. This is where the behavior shifted. The creature didn't leave. It stood its ground. Witnesses reported loud vocalizations, deep sounds, sometimes described as screams or roars, objects being thrown, branches snapped. But even then, no direct attack. The behavior felt controlled, like it was trying to push the person away, not harm them. And then there was the smallest group, but the most unsettling one. About 8% of sightings. These weren't accidental encounters. They didn't happen because someone got too close. They happened because the creature allowed it, or more than that, created it. Witnesses described it stepping into view, from behind trees, from the edge of clearings, places where it had full control of visibility and escape. It didn't rush. It didn't hide. It stayed, just long enough to be seen. And then it was gone. In many of these cases, the witnesses were alone, during those same twilight periods, in locations where retreat was easy, for the creature, not for them. And the feeling reported was always similar. Not just fear, but the sense of being watched before anything even appeared, as if the encounter had already started before they realized it. And this is where the pattern becomes difficult to explain, because if these were random sightings or misidentifications, you would expect chaos, different descriptions, different reactions, but that's not what the AI found. The behavior stayed stable, from California in the 1960s to Kentucky in the 2020s. Same movements, same reactions, same patterns. Which means whatever they saw, it behaved the same way, every time. But none of this explains the one pattern that shocked the researchers the most. The most disturbing pattern. This is the final layer, and it changes the meaning of everything that came before it. Because the AI stopped only looking at where things happened, it started looking at what happened after, years after, decades after, and what it found was deeply unsettling. In region after region, the same sequence appeared. First, repeated Bigfoot sightings, not one or two, not isolated reports, clusters. Then, something else would begin to follow, slowly at first, almost invisible. Population decline. Small rural towns near these hotspots began to shrink over time. Homes were abandoned, schools closed, businesses disappeared, not suddenly, but gradually, year by year. And when the AI measured it across decades, the pattern held consistently. In many of these areas, The system calculated around 70% predictive accuracy, meaning if a location showed repeated sighting activity, there was a strong chance that within 10 to 20 years, the surrounding human population would decline. That result didn't just confuse the researchers, it stopped the room. Because nothing in biology, nothing in ecology, explains that kind of long-term correlation. But it didn't stop there. When the AI layered in other anomalies, the pattern became even heavier. Reports of electronic devices failing during encounters, cameras shutting down without reason, batteries dying instantly, compasses spinning in circles, and in the same regions, witnesses also described strange sounds, deep knocking in the woods, screams with no clear source, movements that felt too large to be hidden. At first, each of these was treated as separate noise in the data. But when combined, they all kept pointing back to the same zones, the same exact locations where sightings, disappearances, and decline were already happening. It wasn't just appearing in these places. Something about these places was changing, and the AI didn't have a simple explanation for why. Because no normal animal behavior creates long-term demographic shifts. No known species produces consistent technological interference, and no known natural pattern links sightings to human population movement like this. So, by this point, we have seen all the patterns that AI has shown in detail, and all of them pointed towards something highly structured, something precise, something that doesn't belong to the kind of stories we usually dismiss. So now, we are left with only one final question. Is Bigfoot real? After processing over 10,000 reports across decades, across continents of wilderness, the AI reached a conclusion that didn't sound like belief or disbelief. It sounded like rejection, a systematic rejection of every normal explanation. First, it ruled out the idea of a hoax. Too many independent witnesses, too many decades, too many locations. No coordinated human effort could maintain that level of geographic spread and still keep the same timing, behavior, and environmental patterns consistent for over 70 years. Then it rejected misidentification. The system compared sightings against known wildlife patterns, bears, large mammals, even human perception errors in low visibility conditions. But the clusters didn't behave like confusion. They appeared in places where large animals weren't even present, and at times when human observation patterns didn't match. And finally, it rejected the most grounded explanation of all: a normal animal, because no known species, no primate, no mammal, no predator, operates on a global timing cycle linked to barometric pressure shifts, geomagnetic anomalies, and specific transition periods between light and dark. None of it fit. So when biology failed, the researchers were forced into territory science usually avoids. They began examining the fringe variables that the AI had quietly flagged all along. The first idea was the most controversial: the interdimensional hypothesis. Because many of the strongest sighting zones overlapped with magnetic irregularities, places where Earth's field behaves unpredictably. Some researchers suggested these regions could be thin points in reality itself, places where something could briefly cross over and then disappear again. Then came something even more unsettling: the consciousness link. A large number of witnesses described the same thing before anything physically appeared. A feeling of being watched, sometimes even a sense that something was aware of them before they saw it. And then there was the simplest explanation, but also the hardest to define: an unknown natural force, not a creature in the traditional sense, but not imagination either. A system of behavior tied to the Earth in a way we don't yet understand, operating on signals, frequencies, or conditions that modern science doesn't fully recognize. Now, none of these explanations has been proven, but all of them were what remained when everything else failed. So here we are. For years, we brushed off everything about Bigfoot as just random stories. But now AI has uncovered patterns that make it far more structured than anyone believed possible, which leaves us with a bigger question. How much of what we think we know right now is actually real? And what else will be challenged next as technology keeps advancing? Let me know your thoughts about this in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories like this one. Until then, see ya.